There is a unique kind of fear that grips us when we realize the danger isn't outside our homes, it is already inside. Most of us feel safe behind locked doors, confident that our walls and roofs are shields against harm. But what if that safety is an illusion? What if someone, or something, has been quietly observing, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself? These are not tales of ghosts or the supernatural, though those stories have their place. These are real-life horrors, stories pulled straight from the anonymous corners of the internet where people dare to share the unthinkable, intruders who live among us, unseen, unnoticed, and horrifyingly close. Reddit, the vast and often chaotic social media platform, has become a modern-day repository for such chilling accounts. Within forums like our No Sleep, our short scary stories, and our creepy, ordinary people recount extraordinary experiences with uncanny precision. Readers from around the world are drawn to these stories because of their raw authenticity. Unlike fictional horror novels, which rely on imagination, these accounts carry the weight of real fear, the kind that keeps you awake at night, listening to every creak in your home, questioning the shadows in your peripheral vision. Imagine coming home after a long day, exhausted, ready to relax, only to hear faint scratching coming from above. Perhaps it's just a rat. Maybe it's the old house settling. But as the nights go by, the noises grow louder, more deliberate. Your mind tries to rationalize the sounds, but a seed of fear has been planted. You think you're alone, but are you really? That is the essence of the stories you're about to read. You think you're safe at home, but what if someone had been watching you all along? What if they knew your schedule, your habits, even your most private moments? The tales that follow are not just stories, they are warnings. Each account is drawn from Reddit's troves of first-hand experiences, where anonymity allows people to reveal events they might never share in the real world. From intruders hiding in attics for months, to strangers quietly inhabiting walls, to roommates who weren't as alone as they thought, these stories will make you question every creak, every shadow, and every sound in your own home. In this compilation, we will explore 5 true scary stories that will chill you to the bone. Each story has been selected for its ability to evoke fear, tension, and a lingering sense of unease long after the final sentence. Our journey begins with the most unsettling scenario, a person who lived unnoticed in someone's attic for months. It is a story of secrecy, fear, and the terrifying reality of having someone invade the most private sanctuary you have, your home. Brace yourself, because what you are about to read will make you look at your ceiling with a new, cautious eye. Mark Thompson was an ordinary man with an ordinary life. He had recently purchased a quaint, 2-story house in a quiet suburb, drawn to its charm and creaky wooden floors that whispered stories of a bygone era. For him, the home represented stability and comfort, a sanctuary after long hours at his job in the city. Nestled between well-maintained lawns and tree-lined streets, it felt safe, familiar, and predictable. Friends and family often envied the cozy layout, the small attic with its sloping roof, and the inviting warmth of the fireplace in the living room. It was the kind of home where you could imagine decades of happy memories being made. Life was simple and peaceful for the first few weeks. But subtle hints of something odd began to creep into Mark's awareness. Small items went missing, nothing of great value, but enough to make him pause and double-check his keys or wallet. At first, he brushed it off as absent-mindedness. After all, moving into a new house came with its share of forgetfulness. Yet, as the days passed, he noticed noises at night that didn't quite belong, soft thumps, faint creaking above his head, and occasional scuttling sounds from the attic. Attributing the noises to rodents or the old house settling, he tried to ignore them, though a prickling unease started to grow at the edges of his mind. The house itself seemed almost too quiet during the day, with shadows falling in unexpected places and the wind causing subtle rattling in the windows. Even the friendly neighbors, though kind, seemed oddly protective of their privacy, avoiding direct questions about the house's history. Mark's instinct told him something wasn't right, yet he couldn't articulate what it was. It was a growing suspicion he chose to silence, preferring the comfort of routine over the gnawing anxiety that something unseen might be sharing his space. The first night that Mark began to suspect something more sinister, he was awakened by the unmistakable sound of footsteps above him. At first, he thought it was the house settling, the familiar creaks that accompanied its age. But the steps were deliberate, paced, and clearly human. A chill ran down his spine as he lay frozen in bed, straining to hear over the pounding of his own heart. The noises stopped, only to start again a few minutes later, accompanied by a soft scratching, like nails dragging across wood. For a moment, he convinced himself it was an animal, perhaps a raccoon or stray cat somehow made its way inside. Yet, as he tiptoed to investigate, he noticed the attic door slightly ajar, even though he distinctly remembered locking it earlier that evening. A sinking feeling washed over him, and small unease began to build. Objects in the living room seemed slightly out of place, a picture frame tilted, a chair not where he left it. Nothing screamed danger yet, but the pattern was growing too consistent to dismiss. Over the next few days, Mark became hyper-aware of every sound, the creak of floorboards, the flutter of the curtains in the breeze, even the hum of the refrigerator. He started checking doors obsessively, installing new locks, and peering up at the attic hatch with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Every minor discrepancy, missing keys, a food wrapper in an unusual spot, a cupboard left slightly open, added weight to a mounting realization he might not be alone. The thought was terrifying, but also strangely compelling. The idea of someone secretly inhabiting the uppermost part of his house, observing him from the shadows, gnawed at his mind, turning ordinary nights into exercises in paranoia and vigilance. Mark's breaking point came when he could no longer ignore the nightly disturbances. Determined to uncover the truth, he invested in a few small security cameras, placing them strategically near the attic entrance and throughout the house. The following evening, as he settled into the living room, he reviewed the footage in disbelief. Shadows moved along the attic floor, objects shifted, and at one point he saw a figure crouching and adjusting what appeared to be a makeshift bed. The intruder was real. Someone had been living in his attic for months, unnoticed and undetected. As he ventured into the attic himself, armed with a flashlight, Mark's horror deepened. The space had been adapted for habitation, a small mattress tucked into a corner, blankets arranged as if for comfort, and scattered food wrappers that suggested regular meals. Personal belongings were strewn across the floor, clothing, toiletries, and even a small journal filled with scrawled thoughts. The intruder had been observing Mark's life intimately, leaving no trace for him to easily discover until now. Every sound he had dismissed, every strange occurrence, now painted a grim picture. The person had been inside his home without permission, learning his routines and exploiting every vulnerability. The attic smelled faintly of must and damp fabric, but the psychological impact was far worse than the physical evidence. The realization that someone had been so close, breathing the same air and walking the same floors, sent waves of fear crashing through him. Mark's sanctuary had been violated in the most intimate way possible, and the violation cut deeper than any physical threat could. The house he thought was safe, the space he considered his private world, was now a place of horror. The intruder's presence was tangible, and Mark knew the journey to reclaim his home, and his peace of mind, was just beginning. Mark decided that he could no longer wait for the intruder to leave on their own. He called the police, explaining the situation with a mix of anger and trembling fear. Together, they returned to the house at night, flashlights slicing through the darkness. As they ascended into the attic, Mark's heart pounded with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Every step was measured, every creak magnified in the tense silence. Then, they saw movement. A shadow darted across the corner of the attic, too fast for a clear identification. The intruder made a desperate attempt to escape, leaping down from a small attic window onto the side yard. The police pursued, eventually capturing the individual just a few blocks away. It was a young adult, thin and agile, with a disarming familiarity that made the horror even more surreal. Questions flooded Mark's mind. How long had they been there? What had they been thinking? Why had they chosen his home? Answers were scarce, leaving him with more fear than closure. Even after the intruder was taken into custody, Mark's life was forever changed. Nights became sleepless vigilances, every creak in the floor, every wind gust against the windows, triggered memories of the intruder's secret presence. He installed more sophisticated security measures, changed locks, and even sought therapy to cope with the trauma. The emotional aftermath lingered longer than any physical threat could, a constant, gnawing paranoia, a fear that his home might never truly be safe again. What had once been a place of comfort and serenity became a reminder of the fragility of security, the terrifying reality that someone could live among us undetected, and the indelible mark such an invasion leaves on the human psyche. Samantha Harris had just landed a new job in a bustling city and needed a place close to work. After weeks of searching, she settled on a modest, second-floor apartment in a historic building that had a reputation for charm and a hint of eccentricity. The rent was affordable, the location ideal, and the creaky floors and slightly aged wallpaper added character, rather than concern. For Samantha, It seemed perfect, a new start, independence, and the excitement of living alone for the first time in years. The first few nights were uneventful, filled with the usual city sounds of passing cars, distant sirens, and the occasional barking dog. But soon, she began to notice subtle oddities. She would wake in the middle of the night to faint murmurs coming from the walls, soft, almost conversational sounds she couldn't identify. At first, she convinced herself it was the building settling, or maybe neighbors moving around. Footsteps sometimes echoed in the hallways, but they felt oddly close, almost like someone was moving within her walls. These disturbances were inconsistent, there one night, absent the next, but their unpredictability began to gnaw at her sense of security. As the weeks passed, the strange occurrences intensified. Small, inexplicable items began appearing in her apartment. A folded note tucked behind a vent, childish drawings smeared on scraps of paper near the baseboards, even tiny objects moved from their usual places. Each discovery added a layer of unease, and Samantha started documenting everything in a small notebook, hoping patterns might emerge. She tried to reason with herself. Maybe she was simply stressed from work, imagining things that weren't real. Seeking advice, Samantha spoke to a few of her neighbors. Some dismissed her concerns, claiming old buildings always make noises. Others hinted at unsettling stories about the apartment, vaguely warning her that it had a history but refusing to elaborate. This mixture of dismissal and half-hearted warnings only heightened Samantha's anxiety. Every day, she felt watched, the sensation crawling along her spine whenever she sat alone or showered. The idea that someone could be hiding nearby, unseen but present, was terrifying, yet she couldn't pinpoint where the feeling was coming from. The intrusions became more personal. Drawings now included representations of her apartment, precise sketches of rooms she hadn't shared with anyone. Notes contained cryptic phrases, "I see you when you sleep" or "Don't turn around." The growing intensity of these messages made her realize the intruder wasn't just nearby, they were intimately aware of her routines and habits. Samantha's paranoia escalated. She installed motion-activated lights, repositioned furniture, and avoided certain rooms at night. But no precaution could erase the mounting dread. The presence was patient, calculated, and terrifyingly close. Finally, after a particularly restless night filled with scratching and whispered sounds, Samantha decided to investigate further. She removed an old, loose panel in her bedroom wall, hidden behind a dresser. Behind it was a narrow, dark cavity, just large enough for a person to squeeze through. As her flashlight illuminated the space, she saw evidence that the intruder had been living there. Scraps of fabric for bedding, small containers of food, and personal belongings carefully hidden. The realization hit her like a punch. Someone had been inhabiting her walls, observing her life for weeks, possibly months, without her knowledge. Her pulse raced as she explored the cavity further. At that moment, a faint whisper echoed, "You shouldn't be here." Samantha froze, every instinct screaming danger. The intruder stepped from the shadows, thin and pale, eyes wide and wild, as if startled to be discovered. Time seemed to slow as she backed away, trembling, heart hammering in her chest. The person said nothing more, retreating into the depths of the wall space, disappearing as if melting into the shadows. Samantha stumbled back into her apartment, fumbling for her phone to call the authorities. When the police arrived, they carefully searched the building and eventually apprehended the intruder, a young adult who had been moving silently through wall cavities and hidden crawl spaces. The perpetrator's knowledge of Samantha's routines, every small detail of her life, was horrifying. The reality that she had been watched so closely and could have been physically confronted at any moment left her shaken to the core. The police praised her vigilance but confirmed her worst fear. The intruder had been inside the apartment for weeks, exploiting the building's structural quirks to remain undetected. Even after the intruder was apprehended, Samantha struggled to reclaim her sense of safety. Sleep became difficult, shadows in corners sparked panic, and she found herself checking walls and doors compulsively. Therapy helped her process the trauma, offering strategies to cope with anxiety and regain trust in her surroundings. Despite these efforts, the psychological scars lingered. The knowledge that someone had been inside her home, hidden in the walls, was almost unbearable. Eventually, Samantha decided to move. She found a new apartment in a modern building with enhanced security and fewer hidden spaces. Yet the experience left an indelible mark, a constant reminder that danger often hides where we least expect it. Looking back, she realized how close she had come to harm, and the story of the stranger in the walls would forever remind her, and anyone who hears it, that vigilance, awareness, and intuition are our first defenses against unseen threats. Emma Carter was starting her sophomore year at a bustling university, eager to embrace independence and campus life. She had found a reasonably priced apartment just a few blocks from class and was set to move in with a roommate named Julia, a senior who seemed friendly and reliable. The apartment itself was small but cozy, with a sunlit living room, a modest kitchen, and 2 bedrooms separated by a narrow hallway. Emma felt lucky, an affordable place close to campus, sharing costs with someone responsible. For the first few weeks, life seemed normal. Julia was sociable yet private, and the apartment felt comfortable and safe. However, Emma began to notice subtle oddities. Julia would act strangely at times, disappearing for long periods without explanation. There were unexplained sounds at night, whispers, faint footsteps, and doors creaking despite being locked. At first, Emma dismissed these occurrences as minor quirks of old apartment living. Yet, a creeping unease began to settle in. Something felt off, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. It was the kind of discomfort that gnawed at the back of her mind, urging vigilance while insisting she keep calm. Over the following weeks, Emma's unease grew into suspicion. Small things began to shift in her apartment. Objects she knew she had placed in certain spots were moved when she wasn't looking. Food she had purchased mysteriously disappeared, leaving her questioning whether she was misplacing it or if someone else was helping themselves. At first, she thought it was Julia, but the inconsistencies in her roommate's schedule didn't add up. It wasn't just minor disturbances, the pattern suggested someone else might be involved. Determined to get to the bottom of the strange occurrences, Emma installed discrete cameras in common areas of the apartment. She avoided placing them in Julia's private space, respecting boundaries, but wanted evidence of what, or who, was causing the disturbances. The footage revealed something chilling: shadowy movements in the hallway at odd hours, the sound of whispering that didn't match any conversation she overheard. Doors she knew she had locked sometimes appeared ajar or locked themselves without explanation. The apartment, once a place of comfort, had transformed into a psychological maze, each night filled with tension and dread. Emma's nights were the worst. She would lie awake listening for the slightest sound, heart racing at every creak. The feeling of being watched was pervasive, and paranoia began to creep into her daily life. The whispering, sometimes almost human, sometimes unintelligible, became more frequent. Something, or someone, was testing her patience, learning her routines, and challenging the limits of her courage. Emma's fear grew in tandem with the increasing evidence that the apartment was not as empty as it seemed. The breakthrough came one evening when Emma returned from class to find the living room rearranged in a peculiar manner. Cushions from the couch were stacked unnaturally, and the kitchen counters had small objects she didn't recognize. At first, she panicked, imagining someone had broken in while she was out. Then, as she reviewed her camera footage, her stomach dropped. There, clear as day, was a figure, someone not Julia, slipping silently into her apartment, moving with a practiced stealth that suggested weeks of familiarity. Emma's investigation revealed a horrifying reality. An unknown person had been secretly living in her apartment, utilizing hidden spaces and cracks in the walls to remain undetected. They had been coming and going at odd hours, accessing her belongings, and subtly rearranging objects to maintain control. The intruder's methods were calculated, leaving small messages, testing doors and locks, and using shadows and crevices to hide from view. Emma realized that many of the things she had initially dismissed, doors locking themselves, faint whispers, misplaced items, were deliberate tactics to unnerve her. The apartment, once a symbol of independence, had become a playground for someone with sinister intentions. Faced with the evidence, Emma contacted the police immediately. Officers confirmed that the intruder had found ways to exploit hidden spaces in the apartment structure, ventilation shafts, narrow crawl spaces, and behind cabinets, to live undetected. The meticulousness of the intruder's actions left Emma in disbelief, realizing how long and systematically they had been invading her personal life. The discovery was horrifying not just because of the physical intrusion, but because it shattered the fundamental sense of safety she had taken for granted. With police assistance, the intruder was apprehended. The individual's motives remained unclear, though they had clearly studied Emma and the apartment closely. Julia, Emma's roommate, was shocked but unharmed, and the authorities commended Emma for her careful observation and courage. The incident left a lasting impact on Emma, who struggled with lingering paranoia and distrust of her surroundings. She reinforced security measures, sought therapy to manage anxiety, and became vigilant about her environment. This experience, though terrifying, provided a cautionary lesson. Even in familiar, everyday spaces, danger can lurk unseen. Emma learned the importance of vigilance, self-awareness, and trusting her instincts. The apartment that had once felt like a safe haven became a reminder that the most frightening threats are often hidden in plain sight, quietly observing until the right moment. Lena Morgan had always considered her apartment a sanctuary. Nestled in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city, it offered peace after long, exhausting days at her marketing job. But over the course of several weeks, she began to notice odd occurrences that disrupted her sense of security. Small items she left on countertops or shelves were moved or missing entirely. Footsteps echoed in hallways at odd hours, though the building was almost always empty late at night. Lights flickered without cause, doors that were securely locked would occasionally be found slightly ajar. At first, Lena tried to rationalize the events. Perhaps she was misplacing things in her busy schedule. Maybe the old building's quirks were responsible for the mysterious sounds. But the growing pattern of anomalies made her uneasy. Anxiety settled like a constant shadow over her daily life, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. Sleep became difficult. She woke frequently, listening intently for anything out of the ordinary. The unsettling notion that someone could be inside her apartment without her knowledge slowly took root, replacing her sense of safety with a persistent dread. Lena's peaceful home had begun to feel like a trap, the walls hiding secrets she was desperate to uncover. The fear escalated when Lena began hearing noises in unexpected places, faint shuffling in the attic, scraping along the vents, and subtle thumps from crawlspaces beneath the floors. She started documenting everything, noting the time and nature of each disturbance. With each passing night, the sounds grew more deliberate, as though someone was testing her awareness and patience. She felt a chilling presence just beyond her line of sight, unseen but undeniably there. Determined to confirm her suspicions, Lena installed security cameras covering the main rooms, entryways, and hallways. Reviewing the footage revealed the unimaginable, a shadowy figure moving through her apartment when she was away, leaving subtle but unmistakable signs of habitation. The intruder moved with eerie precision, aware of her routines and cautious of detection, heightening Lena's terror. Each glimpse of movement on the camera intensified her fear, building anticipation of a confrontation she both dreaded and knew was inevitable. Small, deliberate actions, doors left unlocked, minor rearrangements of furniture, and inexplicable whispers, reinforced the sense that the stalker was observing her every move. The apartment, once a safe haven, had become a psychological battlefield. Every creak, every flicker of light, felt like a signal from someone who had invaded her life. Lena's anxiety was no longer mere imagination. It was grounded in tangible, terrifying evidence of a hidden presence. One night, after weeks of monitoring, Lena decided she could no longer live in fear. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of resolve, she quietly ascended to the attic, where most of the disturbances seemed to originate. Her heart pounded as she listened for any sound above or around her. Then, a sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow flickering across the attic wall. The intruder stepped forward from behind an old storage unit, their face partially obscured, eyes wide and intent. Time seemed to slow. Lena's pulse raced, adrenaline surging as she froze in place, unsure whether to retreat or confront the figure. The intruder's presence was overwhelming, the culmination of weeks of hidden terror now manifest in a single, tense moment. They moved with deliberate caution, almost as if testing Lena's reactions, while she struggled to maintain her composure. Every detail, the faint scent of the intruder, the slight rustle of clothing, the cold air in the attic, intensified the scene, creating a suffocating tension. Summoning courage, Lena shouted, demanding the intruder leave. The figure hesitated, then bolted toward a small exit hatch she hadn't noticed before. Lena followed briefly before realizing the intruder would escape, and she retreated to call the authorities. Police arrived moments later, confirming Lena's worst fears. The intruder had been living secretly within the apartment, moving undetected for weeks. The confrontation was terrifying, a stark reminder of the proximity of danger and the fragility of personal safety. Following the incident, Lena worked tirelessly to reclaim her sense of security. She upgraded locks, reinforced entry points, and sought therapy to cope with lingering anxiety. Even with these measures, the memory of the hidden stalker haunted her thoughts, a constant reminder that safety is never guaranteed. Lena's experience underscores a chilling reality. Intrusions are not always visible, and danger can dwell in the spaces we believe to be private. The invisible threat leaves a lasting psychological impact, reshaping how one perceives home, trust, and vigilance in everyday life. After exploring these 5 terrifying stories, one thing becomes abundantly clear: the horror of intruders is not always obvious, and safety is often an illusion. From Mark's shocking discovery of someone living undetected in his attic, to Samantha's hidden stalker inhabiting her apartment walls, each tale reveals the terrifying reality that ordinary people can be at risk without ever realizing it. Emma's experience with an unknown roommate, the family plagued by a guest who never truly left, and Lena's stalker moving silently through her home all highlight a chilling truth. Our personal spaces, the very places we consider sanctuaries, can be invaded in the most subtle and insidious ways. These stories are more than just cautionary tales, they are reflections of how vulnerable we truly are. The intrusions described were not the result of supernatural phenomena but of someone exploiting ordinary living conditions, patience, and human oversight. It is unnerving to consider that these scenarios could happen to anyone: a quiet suburb, a bustling city apartment, a college dorm, or even a family home. Safety, while assumed, is not guaranteed, and vigilance is an essential, often overlooked, component of daily life. The horror lies not only in the physical presence of the intruder but in the psychological toll, the creeping fear, sleepless nights, and relentless anxiety that follows the discovery. For readers, these stories serve as both warnings and lessons. Home security should not be taken lightly. Simple measures like installing cameras, checking locks, reinforcing entry points, and being aware of unusual noises or movements can make a significant difference. Trusting your instincts is equally vital. Those fleeting moments of unease, subtle inconsistencies, or unexplained occurrences should never be dismissed outright. Pay attention to your surroundings, document anomalies, and seek help if something feels wrong. Awareness and preparedness are the first lines of defense against threats that may otherwise remain hidden until it's too late. Yet, despite all precautions, there is a lingering, uncomfortable truth: the unseen intruder can always exist just beyond perception. Maybe it's a neighbor you barely notice, a stranger slipping through overlooked spaces, or someone exploiting a vulnerability you didn't know existed. The thought is deeply unsettling, but it is precisely this tension that underscores the power of these true stories. They remind us that fear is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it lives quietly in the corners of our homes, in the spaces we never check, in the shadows we think are empty. As we close this compilation, remember this final chilling thought: maybe you're not alone, right now. The world is full of hidden dangers, and while we cannot predict every threat, we can be vigilant, cautious, and aware. These stories from Reddit are a glimpse into the lives of those who experienced the unimaginable, and they are a warning to us all. Keep your doors locked, your eyes open, and your instincts sharp. After all, the next story, the next intruder, could be closer than you think, lurking in a space you least expect. The fear does not end here. The shadows remain, the whispers continue, and somewhere, another story waits to be told. Are you prepared to hear it?